It was supposed to be just another Christmas dinner, tense but tolerable. On arrived early, Cabernet in hand, wrapped in hope that maybe this year would feel different. But the warmth of twinkling lights and the smell of cinnamon couldn't hide the frost beneath her family's smiles. As everyone sat down for dessert, her sister Rosine stood, glass in hand, and with a smug smirk declared, "We voted and decided you're no longer part of this family." The words landed like ice water. Anne looked around, expecting disbelief or outrage. But her mother nodded calmly. Her father looked away. Neva giggled, thinking it was a game. Even Cale clinked his glass in silence. No one defended her. No one asked if she was okay. The people she had supported financially, emotionally, and tirelessly had dismissed her like a guest overstaying her welcome. In that moment, something broke. Not just trust, but the illusion that she had ever truly belonged. Anne didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry or demand an apology. Instead, in the thick silence that followed her family's cruel holiday vote, she calmly reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a thick manila folder, quiet, deliberate, and final. As the laughter died around the table, the sound of that folder landing on the polished wood was sharp enough to slice through the air. Rosine froze. Everyone else sat back, suddenly uneasy. "What's that?" Rosine asked, still half-smirking. Anne leaned back in her chair, her voice steady. "Since we're being honest, I came prepared." The smirk vanished as Rosine flipped open the folder and began to scan the contents. Page after page, bank transfers, Venmo receipts, email threads, text messages, each one time-stamped, labeled, and cross-referenced. This wasn't a rant. It was a reckoning. The mood in the room shifted like a dropped glass on tile. Cale reached across the table, pulling the folder toward him, eyes widening as he read a Charleston hotel invoice signed with Rosine's name and a woman named Lena. "You've been spying on me?" Rosine hissed. Anne didn't flinch. "No, I've been documenting. There's a difference." The color drained from Rosine's face. Her fingers trembled as she shoved the folder away, as if it burned. Cale flipped to the next page. His mouth opened, but no words came. Her mother looked up from her buttered roll and finally spoke, her voice brittle with offense. "How dare you weaponize your help like this?" Anne's eyes didn't blink. "You called it help," she replied, voice cool. "But to you, I've been nothing but an ATM. A therapist, a guilt sponge." Every word landed like ice. She stood slowly, her legs shaking but her conviction unshakable. "You said I wasn't family. Then maybe you won't need your fallback anymore." Her father remained silent, eyes fixed on his plate. Rosine's wine glass trembled in her hand. Neva looked confused, still thinking this might be part of a game. But it wasn't. It was the end of one. No one stood up. No one begged her to stay. No one even reached for her hand. And Anne didn't cry. She walked to the door with a grace none of them had ever earned. She grabbed her coat, put it on with calm precision, and opened the door. The cold outside bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill she'd just walked through. As the door clicked shut behind her, quiet, not slammed, it sounded like closure. Even then, Rosine couldn't help herself. From inside the house, her voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You think you're better than us? You're a parasite, Anne." The folder hit the wall with a loud crack, pages scattering like ash. Cale's voice followed, hard and steady. "Who the hell is Lena?" That stopped Anne cold. She turned just enough to glimpse Cale at the window, the folder in his hand, betrayal etched across his face. Her mother tried to intervene. "This isn't the time or the place." But Cale wasn't buying it. "The hell it isn't," he said. "You all wanted honesty. Well, now we're being honest." Anne didn't stay to watch it all burn. She didn't have to. She knew the sound of truth detonating from within. The carefully staged, picture-perfect family moment had cracked wide open, and inside it was something darker, something she had carried alone for too long. And as she walked away, boots crunching frost on the front lawn, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: power. Not because she hurt them, but because she had finally stopped letting them hurt her. Ann hadn't spoken a word since walking out of that house. She didn't slam doors. She didn't send angry texts. She just left. And for a moment, that silence was enough. But her family didn't know what to do with silence. They needed someone to absorb the noise, and when Ann refused, they turned their chaos outward. Within days, the messages started. At first, they were subtle: Neva crying, Senna begging, Toiver implying financial ruin. Not one, "I'm sorry." Not one, "Are you okay?" Just guilt disguised as concern. And then it escalated. Strangers from Ann's past started reaching out. Old classmates, former coworkers, Facebook friends she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Each one carried the same strange tone. "Hey, heard you're going through something. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." One even mentioned Rosen by name. That's when Ann knew the whispers weren't accidental. Rosen was painting a picture, one of Ann as unstable, irrational, dangerous. It was no longer a family fallout. It was a character assassination. A vague post appeared on Facebook from someone Rosen had looped in, a woman who once shared a panel with Ann at a nonprofit. "We need to talk more about mental health, especially when people lash out at their families and play victim." It didn't name Ann, but it didn't need to. 3 comments down, someone tagged her name. Ann stared at her screen. She had the receipts, the folder, the history. She had truth, but she also knew Rosen wasn't looking for facts. She was looking for control. So Ann didn't explain. She didn't argue. She called her attorney. A cease and desist letter was drafted and sent within 48 hours. It included message logs, screenshots, and a crystal clear warning. Any further defamation would be met with legal action. No more holiday texts. No more staged apologies. Just boundaries enforced by law. And then, unexpectedly, the silence broke from the other side. Branwen showed up at Ann's apartment with swollen eyes, a duffel bag, and no words. She didn't need to explain. Ann recognized the look. Betrayal, finally clear in the mirror. Branwen had reached out once, quietly, kindly, and Rosen had cornered her in the kitchen for it. Loyalty meant silence in that house, and Branwen had refused to play mute anymore. Now she was here, and Ann let her in without hesitation. More cracks followed. Cale sent a message. "I owe you an apology. I saw what Rosen was doing for years and stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong." Then another. "You weren't crazy. You were just alone." The man who once sat like Switzerland at every family gathering was now taking a side. Hers. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped Ann feel something again. Not vindication. Not triumph. Just steady. Like maybe she hadn't lost her mind after all. Then came the final blow. Rosen tried to twist everything into a public cry for help. She messaged mutual friends, implied Ann was spiraling, even tried to hint that Ann's emotional state was a threat to herself. That was the last straw. Ann gathered every lie, every smear, every breadcrumb of slander, and handed it all to her legal team. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was defamation. And this time, Ann didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She protected her peace the only way they would understand, by speaking their language, legal boundaries, documentation, and silence. Because the truth didn't need defending. It just needed space to breathe. And Ann had finally made enough room for it. The days that followed the storm were quiet, eerily so. Not the kind of quiet that suffocates, but the kind that breathes. sat by her kitchen window, most mornings watching the fog roll over the mountains, her coffee warm and unbothered in her hands. The texts from her family had slowed, replaced by a different kind of message. Not guilt, not blame, but soft, hesitant apologies, ones that arrived like whispers. Cale was the first. His message came just after 3 a.m., as if the guilt kept him from sleeping. I owe you an apology. I saw what Rosine was doing and stayed silent. I told myself I was being neutral, but that only made it worse. On read the words 3 times before her breath finally released, not because she forgave him, but because it was the first time someone acknowledged the truth without asking for something in return. A few hours later, another message. You weren't crazy. You were just alone. Then Bramwin arrived, not through text, not with a carefully crafted voicemail, but in person. She stood on On's doorstep with a duffel bag and tear-streaked cheeks, whispering, I can't stay there anymore. It's poisoned. On didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside. They sat on the couch like old friends, not saying much. There was no need. The silence wasn't avoidance. It was comfort. Branwyn eventually unfolded the story. How Rosen had threatened her. How Mom said loyalty meant silence. How even Cale was being pushed to claim On was mentally unstable. On listened, her jaw tight, her chest still. She didn't flinch. She already knew the script. She had just never heard someone else say it out loud. Later that night, Bramwyn passed her a printed email, threaded messages from Rosen and Senna, laced with gaslighting, threats, manipulation. It wasn't shocking. It was just confirmation. On tucked the papers into her drawer, without a word. She didn't need them anymore. The proof wasn't for them. It was for her. And she'd already validated her reality. But the most powerful shift came not through documents or declarations. It came through the refusal to react. Rosen's rage continued. Text after text. All venom, all twisted concern. You've gone too far. If anything happens to Mom or Dad, it's on you. On didn't reply. She didn't take the bait. Instead, she poured a cup of coffee, watched the crack in her ceramic mug form from the heat, and told herself, this isn't reconciliation. It's manipulation. She blocked Rosen. All of them. Because forgiveness wasn't something she owed. Especially not when their version of sorry came tethered to expectations. A few days later, Branwyn curled up under a throw blanket on the couch and whispered, I should have said something sooner. On simply nodded. You're safe here, she said, for real this time. And for the first time in years, she meant it. Not just for Branwyn, but for herself. That night, as the wind howled against her apartment windows, On didn't check her phone. She didn't scroll for updates or wonder what new post Rosen had published. She let the quiet wrap around her, like armor, stronger than confrontation, louder than rage. Because real power isn't always in speaking. Sometimes it's in choosing not to. On had spent years explaining herself to people who never really listened. Now, she was finally hearing herself. And that sound, that stillness, was enough. As the winter deepened, so did Rosen's desperation. After her control slipped through On's fingers, she pivoted not toward reflection, but retaliation. It began with subtle manipulation, disguised as concern. On started receiving messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates, former co-workers, distant acquaintances. Each one carried the same rehearsed tone. Hey, just checking in. Rosen said, you might be going through something. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. It wasn't care. It was a campaign. The whispers followed. A vague Facebook post emerged from a woman named Andrea, a peripheral connection at best. We really need to talk about mental health, especially when people lash out and cut off their families during the holidays. Victimhood isn't always what it seems. She didn't name On, but She didn't have to. The third comment down tagged her name. The fifth included an out-of-context screenshot from a message On had once sent Senna, "I'm not sure I can keep doing this with them." It's exhausting. One word, exhausting, was all they needed to twist the story. Suddenly, On wasn't a woman reclaiming her boundaries. She was unstable, emotionally fragile, dangerous, even. Rosen weaponized her concern. She contacted mutual friends with phrases like, "She's isolating. We're just worried." She painted a portrait of a woman unraveling, not one rebuilding. But On didn't panic. Not this time. She opened her laptop, not to post a response, not to defend herself publicly, but to prepare her first official counterstrike. She called her lawyer. Within 24 hours, a formal cease and desist letter was delivered to Rosen. Attached were screenshots, message logs, and a clear legal warning. Any further attempts at defamation, misrepresentation, or character assault will be met with immediate legal action. No more explanations. No more emotional appeals. This time, she spoke in the only language Rosen understood, power without apology. When the email was sent, On sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen. She whispered aloud, not for anyone else, just herself. "You're not winning. You're gasping." And in the silence that followed, she knew Rosen heard it. The days that followed weren't silent, but they were quieter. Some backed off entirely. Others tried to reframe themselves as neutral parties. A few offered private support, like Branwen, who showed up at On's door with a duffel bag. And no words, just tired eyes and truth. But Rosen didn't stop. Her next move was theatrical, attempting to bait sympathy by suggesting On was to blame for everything, even their parents' mounting health and financial issues. A new wave of texts flooded On's phone. "You went nuclear. We're behind on the mortgage. Do you even care?" Neva cried all night. None of them said sorry. None asked how On was doing. They only asked, again, for her to fix it. But the difference now, she didn't. On let the messages pile up, like junk mail she'd never open. She poured herself a glass of wine. No holiday-themed glass, no false nostalgia. Just a clean tumbler, a clear mind, and a quiet resolve. She didn't slam doors. She signed documents. She didn't scream back. She filed affidavits. And she didn't crumble beneath guilt. She stood on the balcony of her own space, breathing in the frost-heavy air like it belonged to her. Because this time, she wasn't reacting, she was reclaiming. Not just her name, but her story, on her terms, and with consequences. It was late when the knock came. 3 sharp taps that echoed too loudly in the quiet of On's apartment. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart quickened as she checked the peephole, then froze. It was Branwen. Her eyes were puffy, face blotchy from crying, her duffel bag slung across one shoulder like she had packed in a hurry. No smile, just exhaustion. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," Branwen whispered. On didn't ask questions. She opened the door and stepped aside. They didn't speak until they were both seated on the couch, the silence between them raw and real. Finally, Branwen exhaled, voice shaking. "I can't stay with them anymore. It's poisoned. All of it." Her confession wasn't just about exhaustion. It was a fracture, a breaking point. And for the first time, On wasn't hearing denial. She was hearing the truth from someone who had once stood on the other side. "They told me loyalty meant silence," Branwen continued, eyes glassy. "Mom, Rosen, they said if I reached out to you again, I was choosing a traitor. That if I didn't fall in line, I'd be next." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded printout, an email thread. On hesitated, heart sinking as she took it. Page after page, laid out the rot behind the performance. Gaslighting, threats, manipulation, screenshots from Rosen, snide remarks from Senna, one line from their mother. If she wants to act like an outsider, treat her like one. You were right, Branwen said quietly. About all of it. Those words hit harder than any insult had. Ann didn't realize how badly she needed to hear them until that moment. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined the betrayal. And finally, she wasn't alone in it. Later that night, another message came in, this one from Cale. I owe you an apology. It read. I saw what Rosen was doing for years and said nothing. I thought silence was neutral. It wasn't. It made it worse. Then another. You weren't crazy. You were just alone. Ann didn't respond immediately. She stared at the screen, stunned. Cale, always the family's neutral zone, was finally speaking up, and his voice, calm and steady, made something inside her exhale. But then came Rosen's retaliation. A message, sharp as glass. You've gone too far. If something happens to Mom or Dad, it's on you. A threat dressed up as concern. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just blame. Ann didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled out the affidavit she had been holding onto for weeks. A formal legal document. Her statement in full support of Cale's divorce from Rosen. She signed it, scanned it, sent it to his lawyer. Done. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. For once, it wasn't just her truth. It was theirs. Branwen and Ann sat on the balcony that night, wrapped in silence, the cold air biting but bearable. Branwen tucked herself into a blanket Ann had draped across her shoulders. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. She was here, and that was enough. I should have come sooner, she whispered. Ann nodded. You're here now. It was the first time in years Ann didn't feel like she was carrying the entire truth on her back. Now, they carried it together. And in that shared weight, there was something new. Not vengeance, but peace. A few days after the chaos finally cracked open, Ann found the envelope waiting in her mailbox. No return address, just her name written in that familiar looping cursive she'd grown up trying to impress. Her mother's handwriting. Even after everything, the sight of it made her stomach twist. She stood there, holding it like a flame in her hand, debating whether to toss it straight into the trash. But something in her whispered, read it, not for her, for you. She walked up the stairs, slowly, placed it on the kitchen counter, and just stared at it. The tea water she'd set to boil went cold. The world outside turned from gold to blue as the sun dipped low. Eventually, she sat down, slid her finger under the flap, and opened it. 3 pages. The first, we miss you every day. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that one line, scripted like a headline on a card. The second page read, your father hasn't been well. His breathing is getting worse. Neva keeps asking when you're coming back. She drew you a picture. Ann stared at those words. For a long time, the manipulation was subtle but sharp, using a child's drawing as a guilt hook, invoking illness like a bargaining chip. And then the third page, we might lose the house. The mortgage is too far behind. We just need a little help. After that, we'll never ask again. Please, Ann. The word never was underlined twice. She folded all 3 pages together, walked outside to the balcony, pulled out the ceramic bowl where she used to keep succulents, and placed the letter inside. With a flick of a match, the paper caught flame. The handwriting curled into black ash, edges glowing orange for a moment before vanishing into smoke. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even feel angry anymore. She whispered, I'm not angry. I'm just done. And it was true. It didn't feel like slamming a door. It felt like taking a key off her ring and tossing it into a river, like burning a map she no longer intended to follow. The kind of final that comes not with fanfare, but with a deep, exhausted breath. Later that night, she found an old emergency contact form tucked in the back of her drawer. She'd started filling it out months ago, paused halfway through when the idea of listing anyone from her family became too heavy to write down. Now, her hand moved with clarity. She crossed off every old name. Her mother, her father, even Senna. In the space that once said primary contact, she wrote one word, me. Her pen didn't tremble. Her name looked different now, less like a placeholder, more like a statement. She belonged to herself again. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about choosing differently. No longer would she be their backup plan, their fallback clause, their first call in a crisis they created and expected her to clean up. She was no longer a ghost in their house, a silence between the lines, a name listed only when it served them. She was her own first choice, unfolded the form neatly, tucked it into a fresh envelope, and filed it away. No ceremony, no hesitation, just a simple truth settled in the act. She had finally chosen herself. And, for the first time, that was enough. It was 2 days after On had sent the cease and desist letter when the knock came. 3 sharp taps, followed by silence. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart kicked against her ribs as she checked the peephole. And there stood Branwen. Her face was blotchy, eyes swollen, mascara smudged like she'd been crying for hours. Slung over one shoulder was a worn duffel bag, and in her other hand, a grocery tote packed with what looked like a hasty exit. No words, no smile, just exhaustion. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," Branwen said softly as On opened the door. On didn't ask any questions. She just stepped aside. Branwen entered the apartment slowly, like someone moving through a memory they weren't sure they wanted to relive. She stood in the middle of the living room for a while, staring at nothing, then finally said, "I can't stay with them anymore. It's poisoned. All of it." On nodded and locked the door behind her. They sat on the couch in silence at first, the kind of silence that had weight, but not tension. When Branwen spoke again, her voice was small. "I should have said something sooner, but after I messaged you, Rosen found out." On turned toward her, her chest tightening. "She cornered me in the kitchen," Branwen continued. "Said if I ever contacted you again, I'd be cut off. Called you a traitor. Said loyalty meant silence." On's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. "I didn't realize how deep it went. The control. The fear." "Yeah," On whispered. "It's easy not to see it until you're the target." Branwen looked at her, then really looked and said quietly, "Cale left. He's staying with a friend. Rosen tried to get him to write a statement about your mental instability. He refused." On felt her throat burn. Branwen reached into her bag and handed On a folded sheet of paper, a printed email thread, pages and pages of messages. From Rosen, from Senna, each one sharper than the last. Guilt, manipulation, subtle threats, outright gaslighting. "Evidence. You were right," Branwen said, "about everything. And I'm done pretending too." Those words landed like sunlight after a long, bitter storm. On hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them until they filled the space between them. Later that night, another message came through. From Rosen. No apology. No reflection. Just venom. "You turned her against us, just like you poison everything." On didn't hesitate. She replied, "You did that all by yourself." Then she blocked Rosen. Phone, email, every platform. That same evening, she opened a document she'd kept in a folder on her desktop for weeks, a legal affidavit in support of Cale's divorce. She had been waiting for the right time. Now it was clear. She signed, scanned, and sent it to Cale's lawyer. Done. That night, she and Branwen sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. The sky was bruised with January cold. Anne brought her a mug of tea, and Branwen didn't say thank you. She just tucked the blanket around herself, leaned back, and exhaled like her lungs hadn't worked right in years. They didn't need words. For once, the silence wasn't hiding pain or fear. It was peace. Real, solid, earned peace. "You're safe here," Anne said quietly. Branwen nodded. "For real this time." Anne nodded back. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she realized something deeper than relief. Maybe she was safe too. A few weeks had passed since the fallout when the letter arrived. It was tucked neatly between a utility bill and a flyer for discounted carpet cleaning, the kind of everyday clutter that usually passed without a second glance. But this envelope was different, plain, white, and handwritten in a script Anne recognized immediately. Her mother's slanted cursive curled across the front like a ghost reaching for a door left ajar. For a moment, Anne stood frozen at her apartment mailbox. The sun was soft on her neck, the air crisp, but her fingers trembled around the paper like it might cut her. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The trash bin was just 6 steps to the left, but something in her said, "Read it not for them, for you." She carried it upstairs, placed it gently on the counter, and stared at it for an hour while her tea turned cold. When she finally opened it, the first page was brief. "We miss you every day." No apology, no acknowledgement, just that line, like a hook baited with longing. The second page, "Your father hasn't been well. Neva keeps asking when you're coming back. She drew you a picture." A pang tugged at Anne. Not sharp, but familiar, like pressing on an old bruise that never fully healed. And then the third page, "We might lose the house. The mortgage is too far behind. We just need a little help. After that, we'll never ask again. Please, Anne." The line, "We'll never ask again," was underlined twice, the ink dug deep into the paper like desperation was trying to carve a promise. Anne read all 3 pages again, slower this time. Then she folded them, walked to her small balcony, and dropped them into the empty ceramic bowl she used to grow succulents. She struck a match. The flame caught instantly, curling the edges inward until the words her mother wrote turned black and vanished into smoke. She didn't cry, didn't shake, didn't even feel sad. She whispered into the still air, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." It wasn't a slammed door. It wasn't a scream. It was something softer, but final, like taking the last key off a ring you've carried for too long and tossing it into a river you no longer intend to cross. That evening, she was sorting through drawers when she came across an old emergency contact form. One she'd half filled during a doctor's visit years ago and never finished. Her pen hovered over the faded names. Dad, Mom, Rosine. All of them had been fallback options. All of them had assumed she'd always be there, the daughter with the steady job and the bottomless well of forgiveness. Anne drew a line through each name, slow and deliberate. Then, for the first time in her adult life, she wrote in a new name. Her own. Her contact. Her fallback. Her choice. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a declaration. That night, as the wind whispered against the windows and the street below quieted, Anne curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book. Not to escape, but to exist. No texts, no emergencies, no guilt-tripped favors wrapped in obligation. Just her. Finally, just her. At its heart, this story is about breaking free from toxic family expectations and reclaiming your sense of worth. Anne spent years being the silent fixer, financially supporting, emotionally absorbing, and quietly enduring cruelty disguised as tradition. But when her family finally cut her off in the name of peace, she found clarity. She realized that love without respect isn't love, it's manipulation. Her journey teaches us that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for survival. Boundaries don't mean you're shutting people out. They mean you're protecting what's left of your peace. If you've ever felt unseen, used, or erased by those who claim to love you, this story might remind you that it's okay to walk away. You deserve respect, not just tolerance. Did this story speak to something you've been through? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. Like this video if it resonated with you. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that hits home.